Good morning, early birds. Thank you, and welcome to this furlough edition of Playbook Breakfast. Several people mentioned to me that they are not going to be rushing out of here today quite as fast as they usually do. We're very fortunate this morning to have the two top economic officials from the White House, Jason Furman, chairman of the President's Council of Economic Advisors, and Gene Sperling, director of the National Economic Council, held the same job with President Clinton, the only person to have the same job twice. So we'll be talking about politics, policy news of the day, and we'll be bringing you into the conversation. Before we start, I'd like to thank Bank of America for their continued support at these events. Playbook Breakfast is an exciting platform for the issues that matter most in Washington, and so we're appreciative for the bank's partnership through the year, through the conventions, on the road, and for these conversations. So thank you to the Bank of America. Welcome you in live stream land. And we'd love to take your questions too. Hit us on Twitter, hashtag PlaybookBreakfast. I have a magic Twitter machine here that will bring your questions in. And so now I'd like to welcome Jason Furman, Mr. Chairman, and Gene Sperling. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you very much. Gene, who's doing the cross-country commute these days, his family now in LA, took an early flight just for Playbook Breakfast.
Early flight meaning I got in at midnight.
Which for you is early. So yesterday on ABC's This Week, Speaker Boehner said that if the president doesn't negotiate over the debt ceiling, we're on a path to default. Do you believe him?
I don't think there were many people who weren't disappointed in the speaker's comments yesterday. First, let's remember, the president has made clear and has shown that he is willing to negotiate on...
He keeps saying that he won't.
No, but let me finish. He is willing to negotiate on sequester replacement, on a small or medium or large agreement. He has said he is willing to negotiate on how to strengthen the Affordable Care Act. What he has said is, however, is that he is not going to sanction negotiations with any faction that are using the threat of default as a way of extracting policy in our democracy. The president's made clear the era of threatening default has to be over. So what the president has said is that if we can get by this threatening of default, if the debt limit is extended, that of course the president has shown time and time again he's willing to negotiate on the budget. And, I think that I think one of the misconceptions that is put out there is that somehow if the Congress were to do its most basic job under Article 1 of ensuring that we pay our bills and don't default for the first time in our history, that somehow that means they're giving up leverage with the president. Well, that's just not the case. This isn't giving the president everything he wants. It's simply doing the minimal amount that you're due on your job. It's not passing immigration for the president. It's not giving him his infrastructure jobs plan, his middle-class jobs plan, minimum wage, any of the budget things that he wants. It is simply saying, let's do our jobs, let's take away the threat of default, and then in divided government, both sides have plenty of leverage over each other to have negotiations and to make trades. And all the president is trying to do is get back to the normal rough and tumble budget negotiations of divided government. And indeed, the sequester itself was designed to give both sides leverage in negotiations. So really, all the president is saying is let's end the era of threatening default. Let's extend the debt limit. Let's take that economic uncertainty out of our economy, out of our political system, and then we will be more than willing to negotiate on a variety of budget and other economic issues. And the last point I'd just say, Mike, and I think this is very important, is the president strongly believes that if he were to sanction negotiations with those threatening default, that would actually increase, not decrease, the chances that we as a country undermine our full faith and credit. Because he would be sanctioning for future times and future presidencies the use of threatening default as a common negotiating tactic. I mean, for example, why in that if that's okay, why wouldn't it be okay for the president to say, I'm not signing a debt limit if you don't pass background checks or immigration? Why would it not be okay for a future Democratic Speaker of the House to say, if you don't pass raise the minimum wage, I'm not going to increase the debt limit? So the president is trying to set a broader way of doing business in our democracy that
Jason,
will decrease the chance that we will one day undermine our full faith and credit.
Jason Furman, and by the way, you were pointing out that the only person at Playbook Breakfast who doesn't get breakfast is the newsmaker, but you got your Greek yogurt.
I did. I'm thrilled.
Jason was telling us that he recently switched, not recently, but you switched to Greek yogurt from
Chocolate chip cookies.
So that's the economic advice it shows. So Jason, one of the most surprising things in politics, something that almost always takes us by surprise, is when people do what they say they're going to do. And for weeks and weeks and weeks, I've been saying to Republicans, what if the president really doesn't negotiate, as he said? Well, what if Speaker Boehner's right and he's not going to pass a debt ceiling? Pass an increase in the debt ceiling? What is your plan B?
The plan is for the Congress to do what it has to do, which is raise the debt ceiling. The Constitution gives the Congress the authority to authorize borrowing. Only the Congress can do that, and the Congress has to do that. That's the only plan here and the only path forward for our economy.
But it's not like a law of physics. Like, what if they don't?
We saw this back in January. There was a lot of Boehner rule, dollar for dollar, all sorts of statements like that. Oh, no. It was the Boehner rule, the dollar spending cuts for a dollar debt limit.
Lots of rules.
And he reasserted that right after the election. And then he turned around and raised the debt limit and did it without drama. I mean, we all know how terrible it is if you default. Even the brinksmanship leading up for the default is bad for the economy. You saw that in 2011. He diffused that brinksmanship this time around at the beginning of the year. And January and February, when we raised the debt limit, was a non-event in the economy. So he has it within his power to do that.
No. He's said that he can't pass a clean debt limit. Should he prove that? Should he put it on the floor? Should he try?
There's a lot of things I know about, but how to manage the House of Representatives is not high up on that list.
All right. Something that you do know are the mechanics of what happens on October 17th. Now, on that exact day, the world doesn't end. But tell me what begins to happen on October 17th, the mechanics of default.
Sure. In fact, we'll go all the way back to May. In May, the United States hit the debt limit. And since then, we've been using extraordinary measures to borrow. And in an enterprise where on any given day you can get $50 billion of cash in or $50 billion of cash out, you need that flexibility. The Secretary last Tuesday deployed the last of those extraordinary measures.
Extraordinary measures deployed. This sounds like the SEALs.
That runs out on Thursday, the 17th. On that day, the United States will no longer have the authority to borrow.
How did that become the magic day?
That is a day.
It has to be October 17th-ish, right?
Right. I mean, that's a day when you have a number of federal payments, and they just sort of work out the numbers, and it's come that way. And the Bipartisan Policy Center, Goldman Sachs, others have reached the same number. So on that day, you can no longer borrow. You have $30 billion in the bank. $30 billion in a place that's running nearly $4 trillion a year, that's plus or minus $50 billion on any given day, is not a lot of money. You'll have days, not weeks, until you deplete that money and default.
And what are the both the mechanics and the politics of prioritizing payments?
Right. I mean, that's not something that Secretary Lew or any secretary before him has ever spelled out. And the reason is it's just too terrible a thing to even want to talk about at this stage. At this stage, we should be talking about how we'd raise the debt limit and how Congress can do its job, rather than talking about a set of events that we just don't want to see this country put in that position.
I'm just trying to get my mind around how much default, how much October 17th, how much of it is psychological, and how much of it is financial.
If you're asking me when Congress should act, a month ago,
That's not really
2 months ago, the 17th is when you have that much left. it's irresponsible to even get to the 17th without having acted. But no, you don't fall off a cliff instantly. We've never actually tested it. We don't know what happens, and we don't ever want to find out what happens. As much as economists love to study all sorts of interesting exotic things, we'd rather study them 100 years ago in another country, not in our country today.
It's important to understand that prioritization is not about avoiding default. It is about managing your default. One of the things that's been the most...
It's avoiding catastrophe during a technical default, right?
Well, I don't know that that's the case. And I think one of the things that's been so disturbing about this period is that you've actually had the House leadership pass proposals to implement how you would do prioritization as if that would be an acceptable solution. It is not acceptable. Prioritization is default by another name. Prioritization is like telling a relative who's got perfect credit, it's okay if you pay your mortgage and don't pay your student loan, your car loan, your credit loan. You would have the United States of America, who's had impeccable credit since Alexander Hamilton, now being sanctioned by the United States Congress to be a deadbeat who pays some bills but did not pay others. If you look at the legislation by Senator Toomey, well, yes, it prioritizes interest in Social Security, but not Medicare, not payment to hospitals, to Medicare, to small businesses. This would be the United States of America not paying its bills on time. That would be just an extraordinarily negative event for our economy, for the global economy, and for the standing of the United States full faith and credit. And the fear is that once the United States fails to pay its bills, doesn't honor its word, not only can it have a very negative effect on the economy, as Jason can talk about, not only does it risk the type of liquidity event that could be very scary for the global economy, but most people believe it means that for years and years to come, we will all pay higher interest rates, the government, mortgage, homeowners, and others, because the credit, our credit, is not the pure, impeccable credit that it had been for over 200 years.
Jason Furman, there have been almost daily questions about the White House briefing of whether there are alternatives that allow the president to raise the debt ceiling to avoid default. Could it be done through the 14th Amendment, the international emergency economic? Is any of those a path?
Right. I mean, the president, Secretary Lew, and many others have spoken to that question and have been very clear that there's nothing in the law that gives the president the authority to ignore the debt limit. And as I said before, there's a Constitution, and the Constitution says Congress can authorize the borrowing.
So you all have concluded there are no escape hatches?
That's correct. There's nothing in those laws that gives the president the authority to ignore the debt limit. And there's nothing, and it's not economically sound either, Mike. I mean, you don't want to open up a treasury auction where your lawyers think it's okay and a bunch of other lawyers are suing you, bringing the case to the Supreme Court while all sorts of political bedlam is underway. That's not the way you want to run an economy. You want to run it with legitimacy and authority all the way around.
Let me just put an exclamation point on what Jason just said. And to be very clear, our lawyers, our constitutional experts do not believe that Section 4 of the 14th Amendment gives the president the unilateral authority to borrow and contradict the clear Article 1 authority of the United States Congress to borrow. We've been very clear on that. But I want to just emphasize what Jason has just said. If you were to imagine an auction taking place under the cloud of unprecedented legal and constitutional uncertainty with unprecedented litigation, that could very much shake confidence in our auctions and our treasuries in much the way that you fear a default would. So there are no easy off-ramps and there are no controversial legal options that do not create, or let me say, there are no controversial cures that don't replicate much of the harm of the disease you're trying to prevent.
Jason Furman, when we announced that we were going to have this Playbook Breakfast duet with you guys, a question that was sent in to me was, isn't a debt limit negotiation your only opportunity to get rid of sequestration? Doesn't seem there's any leverage to address it outside of the debt limit.
It was the whole point of the sequester was to, as Gene said earlier, was to create a forcing mechanism to have a negotiation. And the sequester has two things in it. It has a cut to defense spending, and it has a cut to non-defense spending. And that was designed because there's a lot of Republicans, and a lot of Democrats too, but a lot of Republicans who don't like those cuts to defense spending, a lot of Democrats, and some Republicans too who don't like those cuts to non-defense spending, and that should bring people together. I mean, you saw what happened before all of this when the House tried to pass the appropriations bill for transportation and housing. They couldn't get that bill off the floor because the funding levels in it were so low. So they can't even get support in their own House when they're running it for domestic bills at the sequester level. The defense sequester is painful for a lot of them. So there's no reason you couldn't sit down and negotiate. And understand what that negotiation is. It's not, let's just take the sequester away. It's let's have spending cuts. Let's close tax loopholes. The more you do on the sequester now, the more of those savings you have and the more medium and long-term deficit reduction you'd get. So it's a conversation that's not just about replacing the sequester. It's a conversation about how to do more on our deficit when we need to in the medium and long run. So there's no reason you need the threat of default to have that discussion. We've been prepared to have it all year. We're prepared to have it once we get over this threat as well.
Gene, this weekend, one of your favorite columnists, Peggy Noonan, interviewed James Baker.
My fellow consultant on the West Wing show. We're buddies.
And she said, James Baker told her, presidents always negotiate in order to get an increase in the debt limit. And in fact, President Clinton did 3 times when you were his economic advisor. So why is it different this time?
I'll tell you why it's different. There has never been a period where you have a serious faction or a serious strategy by one political party over a sustained period of time to use the threat of default as a main tactic in extracting policy. Now, I want to say, let me just give you a couple examples of things. If you want to say, have there been times in the past where somebody has flirted with linking something they wanted with the debt limit? Has there been budget bills passed where after it's passed you put the debt limit in there? Of course. But, look at some of the, in 1997, the debt limit was added to the balanced budget agreement. Jack Lew said this. I was one of the 3 negotiators, as you remember, for the 97 balanced budget agreement. I don't even remember it. It was not one of the things you were negotiating about. One of the examples that was used was with President Carter on the oil import fee. You go back and read those articles, as I did. You can barely, the debt limit is mentioned at the very end. What is different right now, Mike, is that you actually have a couple things. You have a concerted effort to use the threat of default to extract policy as a serious political and economic strategy, and that has to end. And also, we've lived through this now. Never before had we seen anything like 2011, where the threat of default had a very serious, just the threat of default had a very serious impact on our economy, on consumer confidence, on the market, on our recovery. And I think at that point, you would have liked to think that all of us realized that now we have gone to a level we can never come back to. And I think most people in markets, most Americans hoped that in the beginning of this year, when Speaker Boehner found a way to extend the debt limit without drama, without hurting our economy, simply asking that the Senate Democrats pass a budget resolution, that a lot of us did believe that the era of threatening default is over. But again, I think this is very, very different. And I think, as the president has said, if he sanctions this type of using the debt limit as a way of extorting or extracting policy gains, he will be sanctioning that use going forward, and that will damage our democracy, and it will very much increase the chance that we have repeated manufactured crisis and repeated threats to default and to the full faith and credit of the United States.
So the president's referred a few times to future presidents as he talks about this. So it seems like what we have here is trying to rebalance the powers between the two ends of Pennsylvania Avenue. Why is that personally important to him? You're with him behind the scenes. What does he say about that?
Well, I think the rebalance issue goes more on the national security side. I think on the domestic side, you're trying to prevent an unprecedented distortion of our separation of powers. That if you were...
Are you saying that that's what's occurring here?
I think it can. Remember, our system is set up so that a minority in Congress has the ability to stall and block legislation. We understand that. We understand that our system does allow a minority in Congress to do certain blocking devices. But this is very different. This is actually saying that a small group can say, if you do not do what we want on policy, if you do not do things that you are not capable of doing through the during the normal rough and tumble of the political and congressional process, we will tank the economy. We will default our economy. We are willing to risk a recession. For the president to allow that, I think, damages our democracy. Nobody, no matter how sincere they might be in their policy conviction, has the right to say, I will put our country into default and risk recession if I don't get what I want. And I think the president is recognizing, and I think all of us should recognize, that if you sanction that as a regular process, that will do great harm to our democracy, great harm to our economy, great harm to the full faith and credit of the United States. And while there may have been times in the past where people flirted with putting unrelated measures on the debt limit, there has never before been a concerted effort like there is now to use the threat of default as an accepted bargaining chip in our country, and it's time to put an end to it. And if he doesn't, it will go on, and you know how the world works. It will be used again and again, and then there'll be payback the next time there is a Republican president and a Democratic House of Representatives. And I think the president does believe it is important for him to not allow this practice to continue.
Gene Sperling, you're one of the very few people in the world who has negotiated with both Newt Gingrich and John Boehner. What's the difference?
Well, it's hard for us to be nostalgic about the Gingrich era. Obviously, we had a shutdown, impeachment, but I will say the following. I do feel that in the 90s, there was an ability when one side clearly was in the wrong place to figure out a way to have a correction. So whether the President Clinton liked it or not, he was able to, he realized he had to move more towards balanced budget after the '94 elections. Whether Speaker Gingrich liked it or not, the country rejected his attempts to essentially end the Great Society and Medicare and Medicaid as we know it. And he had to make a correction. And that allowed us in 1997 to actually sit down and have a negotiation. And this is the important part, Mike. In '97, the negotiation was designed to get a majority of both sides. When you sit down in divided government with the goal of getting a majority of both sides, a lot of opportunities open up. But here's the point. What you see right now is that a lot of their sense of impossibility that they can't do things is created by the decision rules they make, whether it's the Hassert rule or usually worse, that it has to be passed with all Republican votes. The fact that in '97 we were able to have our major budget agreement with the idea that you try to aim for majority of both sides opens up possibilities that are today being closed.
What is the difference in Speaker Boehner and Speaker Gingrich as people?
Well, you know, I like Speaker Boehner. I've spent a lot of time with him. I do believe that that he has wanted to work out, you know, serious budget agreements with the president in the past. I think it's just been unfortunate that he has not had the ability to stay at the negotiating table. He has not had the support to stay at the negotiating table, both in 2011 and at the end of 2012, and I think that cost our country very seriously. But I think the answer to that is that he has to be willing then to open up and be willing to work with Democrats as well as Republicans. And if he were to do that, I think he would have much greater abilities to work out bipartisan compromises that would move our country forward, give wins to both sides, and allow us to avoid this type of era we're in now where our government is shut down, where the Republican Party thinks that only the use of the threat of economic shutdown and government shutdown is a way of getting their policy goals.
Okay, let's talk about what matters to a lot of people in this room, and that is, when will the shutdown end? One possibility that's been talked about is on the Hill. Both parties have talked about that with this, is the idea of going ahead and raising the debt ceiling, but the government stays shut down. Does that look like the most likely possibility now?
I mean, there is a simple solution to the shutdown, which is that the House of Representatives takes a vote. And Speaker Boehner yesterday said that you couldn't get a majority in the House for the CR. Most news organizations, Mike, including I believe your own, have a whip count that contradicts that. So if you let people put it on the floor, let people vote their conscience and vote the way they want to, you could end the shutdown this morning. So I don't know when it will end, but I can tell you it's of all the problems we have in our country, continuing spending at the sequester level for another month and a half as a compromise, which is the compromise the president and Senate Democrats have already made, is one of the easier things to get done in this country.
Now, as you've watched the speaker's rhetoric, he continues to nod to healthcare, but he's tried to move the conversation in another direction, talk about tax reform, talk about entitlements. Is it possible to add some language about that to a deal without violating your red lines?
You don't need to add that language to a deal. If
But
they
he-
pass
but he-
the Senate bill, Mike,
But
the
he
president
might.
couldn't be clearer that he wants to do all of that. The president's enthusiastic about tax reform. He's enthusiastic about putting us in a better position to create jobs up front, invest in our priorities, and do more on deficit reduction over the medium and long run. You don't need to hold a gun to his head to have that conversation. It's a conversation we've been trying to have since December of last year. It's only in the last few days we've even heard anyone in the House interested in discussing it with us.
Gene was pointing out that in the past, some innocuous, in retrospect, measures have been tacked on to these agreements. Would there be a way to give him some language about tax reform, about entitlements, that would get to yes?
I think this is something he needs to figure out how he's going to pass this. I can't sit here, I told you before my understanding of the House of Representatives, and tell him how to manage it. But where we're coming from, what we'd like to see is not having a negotiation with a gun to your head, and then have time to have that negotiation, have it in a real way. And there's a lot of mutual gains to be had here. There's a lot of things you can do that are in everyone's interest. If you just take a little bit of time, get past this and take a little bit of time to do that.
And Mike, to be clear, I've said that there were times, there were occasional moments where people sought to do this. If you look at most budget agreements, almost all of the budget agreements have been about budget issues. And then the debt limit was tacked on at the end. It wasn't the primary source of the negotiation. So, so I think that's important to understand on the history. But as Jason said, you know, what have we seen over the last 2 or 3 years? You've seen the President of the United States willing to go to extraordinary measures on trying to get a pro-growth, pro-jobs fiscal agreement that, as Jason said, is good for jobs in the short term, has long-term fiscal discipline. We all, you know, that's what the President was doing in 2011 when he was in negotiations. That's what we agreed to. That's what you saw after the election in 2012. That was what you saw when the President did the extraordinary step of putting his final offer to Speaker Boehner, or his last offer to Speaker Boehner, in his budget, even after Speaker Boehner had pulled back and said he would not offer another penny of revenue, when at the negotiating table, he still had another $400 billion of revenue on the table. So I agree with Jason on tax.
That's a great. Was this supposed to be a debate, by the way? Because
Your rebuttal time is coming. Yeah.
sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
It's a roast. So on Face the Nation yesterday, John Dickerson was saying that one model for an agreement might be, as you did in January, where you added on that the Senate was going to vote for a budget or lose their pay. Could something like that be used to give Speaker Boehner some fig leaf, something that he could sell to his folks on spending entitlements, tax reform?
I mean,
Is there,
we've talked about how there's a simple path forward here, which is to pass these clean. And if he needs to have some talking point for his caucus that's consistent with us not negotiating, that doesn't violate having something clean, that's not adding a bunch of extraneous conditions, of course he's welcome to figure out, whatever talking point he wants that helps him sell something, as long as it doesn't violate the no negotiation, as long as it doesn't violate the idea that you're basically doing this in a clean way that's not, adding a bunch of extraneous legislation to it.
so the give might be in the definition of clean and the definition of negotiation?
We're not negotiating with him. We're not negotiating with you.
So I'll take
There's
that
a
as a yes.
pretty simple just vote path
So,
here, Mike.
and last question on this. What people ask you every day, what people in this room want to know, when do you think the government will reopen?
I hope
Will it be by October 17th, or will it be longer, or this week, or what?
I just hope as soon as possible. There's no reason for us to operate like this. I have been part of divided government for a long time, and I understand the rough and tumble of divided government and politics, and we just have to get back to that, which is, as I said, pretty tough. Can be pretty tough, but does not require shutting down the government or threatening default. So I would hope any day. I think the public is overwhelmingly against this shutdown, and as Jason said, I think virtually everybody believes that if the House of Representatives was allowed to have a vote, to have everyone vote their conscience, that the shutdown could end today.
Yeah. And just to take it back to the economy, a 1-week government shutdown is not catastrophic for the economy. It doesn't plunge you into the second Great Depression or anything like that. But it's not good for the economy either. Goldman Sachs estimated it takes 0.14 percentage point off your growth rate for each week the government shut down.
What week does it become catastrophic?
The debt limit is
No, I'm sorry.
potentially
No, the
catastrophic.
government being shut
No,
down.
I understand. It doesn't become, each week is about 0.14 off your growth rate, according to Goldman Sachs. Macro advisors had a similar thing. And the conversation we should be having now is how to add to our growth rate. We're in a pretty good place in our private sector. For the last year, the public sector has been a drag on growth. But we should be in a better place for our private sector, and our public sector should be helping, not hurting. So rather than sitting down and talking about what we can do to add to the economy, you're subtracting. And each week the shutdown lasts, you're subtracting more, and it gets worse and worse as you hit the debt limit.
Gene, we were talking backstage. You have a staff of about 80 people, I think. How's the furlough affected you?
I wish I had a staff of 80 people.
Oh, no, you said 80% of your people. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's it's very unfortunate. We have there are very serious things that this government is doing all the time, whether it's monitoring Iranian sanctions or dealing with the trade negotiations, and there's no question that it is hampering our ability to do the people's
But how
business.
has it personally affected your office?
Well, personally, we probably, on the international and domestic side, probably have about 80% of our team not working right
80%
now.
of how many?
Oh, I'd say, Jason, was 30-ish.
And how does that affect what you're doing?
Look,
You're doing more things for yourself, it sounds like.
and there's a lot positive that, as my wife and children tell me at home. But what's not positive is to see Michael Furman, our USTR, being hampered in pushing forward on trade negotiations because his team is not there. Us having a harder time helping, the president trip being pulled back, but us even having a harder time lending support in international economic issues. And there's just many, many important things that we're working on. I believe, for example, our team is working very much on GSE reform. We believe there's a real chance a bipartisan measure could pass the Senate Banking Committee. My entire team who works on housing is now not able to work, not able to make progress on those things, and that's a very important part of the reforms we need to make sure that we never have the kind of problems we did that led to the Great Recession.
All right, let's pull back the camera and talk about how we got here. For the government to be this gummed up, it's impossible that your side doesn't share some of the blame. What part of the blame will you take?
I actually don't agree with that premise, Mike. I mean, this is the CR is a compromise. It's a spending level of $986 billion that incorporates the sequester. It's just another month and a half. And the debt limit is not some ideological victory for President Obama. It's not like Democrats love to not default and Republicans love to default. Both sides have exactly the same position on the debt, which is that our country shouldn't default. I mean, I think it's a little bit like TARP. When President Bush went to Speaker Pelosi and said, you need to pass TARP or our economy will crater, she didn't turn around and say, well, what do I get in exchange for it? TARP is your win, what's my win? She didn't say, I have a lot of crazy people in my caucus, you need to help me politically to pass it. She said, how many votes do you need? Oh, it turns out you need even more votes than you originally said. I'll get you those. So this is not, this isn't the president trying to get victories for himself.
And
He's trying to do the business
Gene's
of the
going to
country.
jump in and take some blame here. Go ahead.
Well, no, I mean, let's look at the merits on what Jason said, and I think if you look at Harry Reid's description on the CR, I don't think Speaker Boehner refuted it, which was that, as Jason says, we believe there should be a higher level sequester. We believe the sequester levels are unacceptable for both national security and for investing in the middle class. The Speaker seemed to suggest that if we were going to get a CR, that was going to give us time to work on a more sensible budget agreement, that the only way it could happen was that it be extended at exactly the Republican levels. And Harry Reid and the president basically were willing on a short-term basis to extend it at exactly the levels Republicans wanted, none of the increases the Democrats wanted. So I think that showed quite a bit of statesmanship and willing to compromise, to give us a period to negotiate on something more sensible. So, sometimes a pox on both your houses is just not the right analytical frame to judge a dysfunctional situation like this.
When we ask that same question of Republicans or even Democrats on the Hill, what you hear a lot, as you know, is people talking about the president's lack of relationships. And this is partly paying a price for that. Why hasn't more been invested in relationships on the Hill?
I look at what the president has done, the degree that he has reached out, been willing to have over the last few years one-on-one negotiations, host meetings at the White House. To be honest, there's been more of that than there was under President Clinton when we were able to get the 97 balanced budget agreement.
President Obama has better one-on-one personal relationships with the Hill than President Clinton did.
I would say that he has been willing to engage as much or more in terms with the leadership on actually face-to-face negotiations. And Mike, let's just remember what happened in January. They said they did not want to negotiate more with him, and what they put on the debt limit extension was asking that the Senate pass a budget so that they could go to conference and have a good old-fashioned conference negotiation on the larger budget issues. And after that happened, and we did not stand in the way of that, 18 times the Majority Leader Reid tried to get a conference going, and it was blocked every single time. So look, let me say this. I think if you were having a budget negotiation and people wanted to say, you got into the merits of, were Democrats willing to give enough on this tough choice versus Republicans being willing to give enough on that tough choice? Well, we could have that discussion. I think overall, Democrats and the president have been willing to move more on entitlements than the Republicans have been willing to move on revenues. But that's a high-class issue. We're just trying to get to those types of policy negotiations. But I think when you look at who is responsible for the idea that we have to shut down the government or threaten default, that is purely something you're hearing from the Republican side at this moment.
Okay, we have a couple Twitter questions here, and keep tweeting us at #PlaybookBreakfast. We have a fan tweet here. Which one of you do you think it was for?
It was Furman, of course.
This is from Nick Buff, who wants to know, why doesn't Gene have his own Twitter handle? Where is that Sperling 44?
Maybe it's because Sperling is 54 years old. Just risk aversion, pure risk aversion.
All right.
But I'll think about it.
And we had just set ours up. It was about to go live, and then the government shut down, and so it hasn't launched yet. But as soon as they reopen the government, the CEA will have a Twitter account.
Okay. All right. Economics of national parks is a key shutdown message point. Will the parks economy be part of the White House playbook in the future?
Oh, the Great Outdoors Initiative has been an important one for the president. It's one that Secretary Salazar pushed forward and Secretary Jewell is doing now. And that's, when you look at the shutdown, we're used to the macro analysis. If you take this much money out of the economy, you get that much off your growth rate. But when you shut down a national park, it's not just taking money out of the economy. It's taking visitors who support those small businesses. When you shut down the SBA, it's loans to small businesses. When you shut down the USDA, it's loans to farmers. So there's a lot of ways in which the shutdown affects and hurts our economy. National parks being
I want to bring you into this. If you signal, we'll bring a microphone to you. Jonathan Carl.
I've got two. One very quick,
You just
specific
carry a
one.
microphone around.
Wherever I go. One very narrow and quick question. Would the White House be willing to accept the idea of a short-term debt limit increase, a couple of weeks, to allow more time for the non-negotiations to not happen?
I think that there's no question that the longer the debt limit is extended, the greater economic certainty there will be in our economy, which will be better for jobs and growth and investment. That said, it is the responsibility of Congress to decide how long and how often they want to vote on doing that. The important thing is that they not threaten default and that they not put our country on the brink of that. So that's
So a 2 or 3 week temporary stopgap extension is not out of the question.
Again, I think that longer is better for economic certainty and jobs, but it is ultimately up to them.
Okay, and then, Gene, you spoke very forcefully about how this kind of brinksmanship and threat of default is damaging to our democracy. So what is worse? Or are you saying that it's actually worse to continue this precedent than it is to go into default right now? I mean, is it worth, to kind of break the fever, to coin a phrase, to go through this so we never have to go through it again?
I think it should be unthinkable and unthinkable for us as a country to default, considering our history, considering the precedent our extraordinary First Secretary of Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, set. So that should be our starting point. But I think the point that I was making and the point that the President believes very strongly is that if you sanction through negotiation the legitimacy of somebody threatening default, then that is going to happen over and over again. So sanctioning negotiations with someone threatening default is not going to end the risk of default. It is likely to increase the chances that we as a country eventually default or even perpetually threaten our full faith and credit. So I do think the only way for us to go forward is to all make clear that the era of threatening default is over. Mike and I were talking yesterday, about things you think about when you've been here for a long time, and I do think it's important that this be a high principle. So when there's a Republican president, I think you should come back to Jason and I think it will be very important for us to say, even when the tables have turned, I promise you I will keep this position, because I think it is so harmful for somebody to be threatening, essentially putting our economy into a potential recession, harming tens of millions of people as a negotiating tactic. You simply have to take that off the table. If you sanction it, you will just increase the chances that it will happen on a regular basis.
So let me just be clear then. So a negotiated solution this time, which would effectively sanction this, is actually worse than default.
Jonathan, could I just, I think this is similar to what Gene was saying. It's not just, you don't want to just take this on a case-by-case basis. You want to ask what the general rule is. And if your general rule is that every time you have the debt limit, you have a really high-stakes negotiation, at a minimum, you see what you saw in the summer of 2011, which is the stock market down 17%, one of the worst months of job growth. And you see that every year you have this high-stakes negotiation. But then you probably, maybe you succeed in those negotiations the majority of times. You only default once every 3 years. That's not a rule that we want to have in this country. So you can't just look at any given one. You have to say, how are you doing this? And if every time you have the debt limit, you have this type of negotiation, that's bad for the economy every year and potentially disastrous every few years. And that's just not something we should be doing when there's a much easier other path.
We're about to get the hook here, so we're going to do a rapid round. Gene, as you know, don't forget health care. How many people have successfully signed up for the Affordable Care Act?
We're going to release those numbers monthly like we do with other medical data. So the truth is we don't have that information now, but my understanding is that it will be put out on a monthly basis. And I think people should look at what the results are. But the right thing, I think, to do is to look on January 1st and see how many people signed up during that time period. That's the period by which people have to sign up to have health care. And I think that you will find that by that time, you will see a significant number of Americans have used this opportunity, and that they will have been able to do so successfully. And I think that will be the test. So stay tuned.
Jason Furman, John Dickerson, who I mentioned before, posted an article called "One Woman's Quest to Sign Up for Insurance Through Healthcare.gov." Took 26 minutes and hung up on her. This is the tech administration. How did this rollout go so badly?
I mean, Apple is one of the best tech companies in the country. Pretty much every time they have a new iPhone, I'm there on their website trying to buy it the day of. And most every time I fail and have to come back a day or two later when their website is back online. I mean, when you have this extraordinary demand, 8.6 million people in the first 72 hours, that puts strain on servers. But they've upgraded those servers. They're improving the software. And you have until December 15th to sign up for coverage starting January 1st. You actually have a 6-month enrollment window. And I don't think people are going to remember this very long. What they will remember is that 6 out of 10 of the uninsured got insurance options that were $100 a month or less.
And Jason always is the first to have a new Harry Potter book or a new Apple device, so he is really an expert in this.
The New Yorker out today, and hopefully you saw this in Playbook today, the New Yorker has a piece called The Business End of Obamacare, arguing that the ACA is fantastic for small business, will actually save small business money. Why then is business so skeptical still?
I don't know what business's attitude is or isn't, but absolutely,
Well,
that's
do.
right.
You
I mean,
know that they're skeptical at best.
But I don't know I haven't seen what all the small businesses in this country think, but maybe that's right, maybe that's not. I don't know. But yeah, the CBO, when it passed, did an analysis, and they said it would reduce premiums for small businesses. It would reduce premiums even more in the non-group market. I also think we have this extraordinary slowdown in health costs. The 3 slowest growth years in health costs that this country has seen since we started collecting data in 1960 were 2011, 2012, and projected for 2013. That's just extraordinary, and that's helping businesses large and small create jobs and raise wages.
Okay, penultimate question, very quick. Gene, you wear a lot of hats. 2 of the projects that you have, these are some of the non-legislative things the president's trying to do. In Detroit, you have an anti-blight thing coming up, and in the next couple months, you have something very interesting coming up, CEOs and the long-term unemployed. Tell us very quickly about those.
Well, one of the things the president makes very clear to us is our job is to make progress whether or not we can pass new legislation. In the situation of Detroit, we had to be very clear there was nothing that we could do to help them on their fundamental bankruptcy issue. But we also made very clear that we wanted to be their partner in their economic revitalization. And so what we did is we looked through, the president asked me to work with all the cabinet to look at places where funds had not got out to Detroit and what we could do to work with them, partner to make sure funds got out, were used well, and that we could make a very strong showing to the people of Detroit that they were not forgotten, that we believe in their future, that we believe that they can remain one of the great American cities going forward. We went with Secretary Donovan, Secretary Fox, Attorney General Holder, announced $300 million of existing funds, and now are in the process of putting together an anti-blight task force that will look further at the goal of what we can do to reduce blight, which the people of Detroit have told us is one of the key things in bringing back their city and making sure that there is one Detroit. Secondly,
Wait, excuse me, what kind of blight are you talking about?
well, there's 2 different types. There's in a lot of communities where we've just had low housing prices, lower housing values, as housing prices come back up, that community strengthens, the housing market strengthens. But what you have in many cities, including Detroit, is you have neighborhoods where you have hard-working middle-class families working hard, but perhaps on their block there are 3 or 4 houses that have been blighted out. That tends to bring crime. That tends to become a haven for people who are not safe for their children.
So we're talking about boarded up, or what?
Boarded up, being used, and bringing down those houses can help restore confidence in that neighborhood, bring up housing values. It also has to do with commercial blight. It's not just about how you take it down. It's also about what land bank strategies, other strategies. But I think that for Detroit, where they have a very strong downtown, they need more growth in the neighborhoods. Blight is holding them back, and that's where we can't just rely on just the market alone. We have to have smart interventions, and that really has to do about whether we as a country feel committed to having a recovery that brings everyone up. And we have to recognize there's a lot of innocent people in those neighborhoods who've done everything right, but the blighted buildings that are not coming down are hurting their housing values, making it unsafe for their children to walk to school. And so those are the kind of things that we're going to continue working on. We wish we could work with Congress more, but if not, we're going to mobilize the private sector, philanthropies, nonprofits, use existing resources, do what we can. Another issue that has to do with whether we have an uneven recovery or not is the long-term unemployed. One of the great challenges in our economy right now is that there are a number of people, a larger percentage of the unemployed have been unemployed for over 6 months. Many have been unemployed for over a year or 2 years. And the reality, Mike, is that if you lose your job for a couple of months, it's tough, it's hard. But when you lose your job for over a year, people often lose their house, they often lose their health, they often lose their spouse. And what we've seen is that as people become unemployed for 6, 7, 8 months, some form of stigmatization takes place, which makes it harder for them to even get interviews. And so you get a very negative cycle. And these are good, hardworking people who just perhaps were in the wrong industry.
So you're going to list CEOs to try to do
time.
what about this?
So what we've been doing is working with CEOs and saying, what are the best practices that you have that you can do to make sure that in your hiring practices, you're still giving a chance to people who are unemployed. You're not contributing to that negative cycle. And we've gotten a very positive response. And we've also looked at some programs that are working in Chicago, Skillland, the Pathways to Jobs initiative, where we've seen successful programs. So we're going to have, the president's challenged us to work with CEOs to put together an initiative to help, in the absence of congressional action, to ask those CEOs to work with us on employing the best practices for making sure that we're giving people who are long-term unemployed a chance to get back in the workforce, get trained, and have a second chance to support their families and have a bright economic future. And it is the humane and moral thing to do, but it is also the right thing for our economy. Europe had this problem for many decades. We never did. I think it's incumbent on all of us to make sure that we are addressing the issue of long-term unemployment. This is one of these issues where an ounce of prevention will be worth a pound of cure later. And so the president has asked myself, Jason, Penny Pritzker, Tom Perez, others, to work with CEOs. And I think hopefully when this government shutdown ends, we'll have a very good initiative and event that will go on that will include CEOs and nonprofits.
And Jason Furman, if there's anything that excites you as much as Greek yogurt, it's tax reform. What are the chances that something real is done about tax reform in the next 3 years?
We certainly should. I mean, we have the highest corporate tax rate in the world.
But
We also have pretty much the most loopholes in the world. And you combine those, and you have a real opportunity to bring that rate down, broaden the base, restructure your tax code, and make our economy more competitive. I think there's been a lot of convergence.
But how could that happen?
I think there's been a lot of convergence, Mike, in terms of the specifics here. I think a lot of Democrats, Republicans, folks in the business community are talking about a rate in the mid to upper 20s, are talking about similar ways to broaden the base and restructure the tax code. International is a tough issue, but even there's a general acceptance of a hybrid system that's globally competitive, that's tough on base erosion. So I think a lot of the ingredients on the business side for an agreement are there. What you need to do is just unlock all of that agreement and figure out a path forward. And that's what the president tried to propose this summer when he said, let's combine it with something else the business community likes, infrastructure, and put the tension around a grand bargain for jobs.
And this convergence includes some of what the House Ways and Means Chairman Dave Camp is proposing. You like some of what he's doing?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't seen his plan, but he's certainly put out a lot of thoughtful ideas for discussion. and I think has provoked a good discussion. One of his ideas, for example, on derivatives, we took a look at it, thought it was a great idea, and put it into our own budget.
So you think there's a chance something real is done in the next
I think
3
there
years?
is definitely a chance. I think the United States is falling behind if we don't do it, and I think there's increasing agreement on how to do something. So I certainly think there's a chance.
Okay, as we say goodbye here, a personal question for both of you. Gene Sperling, you're going to depart government around January 1st. You've worked in every day of every Democratic president since Jimmy Carter. You were in the administration for every day of Bill Clinton. You've been in this administration for every day of Obama. You're taking off. You have a house in Georgetown. Your family's in LA, and you would make the most money in New York. So what are you going to do?
All I'd say is I am the luckiest person in the world to be able to done my dream job for 2 amazing presidents, and it's a great opportunity for service. And as much as you can try to do great things outside, you never have the chance to have an impact on real people's lives like you do when you have those opportunities. And the things that you can do, whether it's what we've been able to do over 20 years and increasing tax cuts for low-income, hardworking families, or finding a way to do fiscal discipline in a way that maintains progressive priorities. Those are most important things. So I don't know what I will exactly do and how
West
I will
Wing
manage.
is off the air.
I will manage my my bi-coastal relationship, but I will be sad to go, but I will be very happy to not just be flying in on Friday nights and flying out on Sunday nights. I still hope to have a work life in Washington, D.C. or New York, as you suggested, but it will have to be something that gives me more flexibility to be with my family. I have a 7-year-old girl, and that's a 7-year-old girl is perhaps the cutest thing in the entire world, and I have to be with her more than 2 nights a week.
I actually think a 5-year-old girl and a 6-year-old boy, but I don't want to be too disagreeable here.
Now, you're a very good manager of time because you've got 2 kids, you have this job, and you're known for the book reviews that you post on Facebook and now Goodreads, which we can subscribe to. How do you do it?
I just can't fall asleep at night if I'm thinking about the debt limit or the shutdown or any of those things. So I have to find something else to get me
Because
to
you
sleep.
post like a book review a week.
It's something like that. But when time gets shorter, I read shorter books, and when I have more time, I read longer books. So it's always the same number per
I
week,
should
but
do
the
that.
pages vary.
I just when I'm in that situation, just try to see how much of Playbook I can memorize. And
It'll make you a better person. And Jason Furman, you juggle.
That is true.
Why? How?
I used to do flaming torches on a unicycle in Washington Square Park. I'm now off the unicycle, but give me a drink or 2 and I can do flaming torches still.
Mike, I'll just tell you one thing. I had the fortune once of meeting the actor Matt Damon, who turned out to be, here's an anecdote, was one of Jason Furman's roommates in his freshman year at Harvard. And he describes coming and first seeing this guy juggling at Harvard Square, and then talks to him and figures that everybody at Harvard is going to be as smart as Jason Furman, and calls home and says, I don't know if I'll make it here. So
So the next, at the next Playbook Cocktails, we're going to have flaming torches. Thank all of you in live stream land and for the Twitter questions. Thank Bank of America for making this possible. Thank my Politico colleagues who worked so hard on this all weekend. Thank you for coming out early. And Jason Furman, Gene Sperling, thank you for a great conversation. Thank you, bud. Thank you so much.